At the end of Resident Evil 4 Remake's Separate Ways, we see that Wesker has collected the body of Krauser, and this is pretty much how things played out in the original Resident Evil 4, where after Ada betrays Wesker and takes the sample to the organization that she was truly working for, Wesker ends up collecting the body of Krauser to extract the plaga from his arm, and that ends up leading us into Resident Evil 5, where we see the Type 2 and 3 plaga. But something I'm really curious about in terms of the remakes is, could we potentially see Krauser make a return in a Resident Evil 5 remake? Because one thing these remakes do is they sort of change up a few things. One example of that would be Krauser himself, where in Resident Evil 4 Remake, he's actually loyal to Sadler and is a part of Sadler's group and not affiliated with Wesker at all like he was in the original. So that's one change right there. So could they do that again with Krauser, where in a Resident Evil 5 remake, he actually makes an appearance? Because I think there's two ways that this could actually happen. One way is that maybe after Wesker extracts a sample of plaga from his arm, he actually brings Krauser back to life. And this is something that Wesker has mentioned doing before with Steve Burnside in Code Veronica, so maybe he does this with Krauser, and then we end up getting the original Krauser back, where he's now working for Wesker, he's loyal towards Wesker, and I think that'd be a really cool thing to see. The only downside to it is that we wouldn't get to see that version of Krauser go up against Leon and Ada, but rather we would see him go up against Chris and Sheva. But I think this would be a really cool concept nonetheless, because like I had just said, it would allow for us to get to see the original version of Krauser that works under Wesker once again, and I think that would just be a really cool thing to see. On top of that, we would get to see Chris versus Krauser, and I think that is also a really big bonus as well. But I just feel that overall, this is probably an unlikely possibility. I think it's much more likely that Capcom will stick to the original script of Wesker just takes a sample of plaga from his arm and then throws his body out, as opposed to Wesker reviving Krauser altogether, and now he's a part of the storyline of Resident Evil 5. I don't think that's very likely, but it is a possibility. Now, having said that, there is another possibility that I thought of that I think is a bit more likely than Wesker reviving Krauser altogether, and it's that in Resident Evil 5, there's a boss fight against Ouroboros where Chris and Sheva go into this lab, and there's a person in the lab that's been infected with Ouroboros, but they're not compatible with the virus, and therefore they begin to mutate into this giant blob of Ouroboros that Chris and Sheva have to take down. What if, instead of it just being this random individual that was infected, it was actually the body of Krauser, and Ouroboros is sort of puppeteering his body? I think this would be a really cool concept because, for one, it would allow us to know what Wesker did with Krauser's body once he was done extracting the plaga from his arm, and two, it would in a way give us that additional fight with Krauser that we did not get in Remake 4. Because in the original Resident Evil 4, you had two major fights, not counting the knife fight, against Krauser. One in the main game with Leon, and one in Separate Ways with Ada. But in the remake version, you don't have a fight with him in Separate Ways. You only have the one fight in the main game. So this would be, in a way, that additional fight with Krauser. Even though it wouldn't technically really be him, it would just be Ouroboros puppeteering his body, I still think it'd be a cool concept to see, and it would allow for him to sort of make a little cameo in the game, and it would further connect Resident Evil 4 with Resident Evil 5. And then also, not to mention, but I think I'm right in saying this, but in Resident Evil 5, I believe you fight two of these blobs of Ouroboros as boss fights. So why not take one of those out and instead replace it with the body of Krauser being puppeteered by Ouroboros? That way it sort of separates things and it doesn't feel like you're fighting the same boss twice. So I think those are sort of the possibilities of what they could do in terms of bringing Krauser into Resident Evil 5 Remake, but like I said, I think it's more likely that they will just stick to the original script, have it where Wesker extracts the plaga from his arm and then throws out the body, rather than Krauser now has like this major role within Resident Evil 5 Remake or anything like that. But What are your thoughts? Would you like to see Krauser show up in some sort of way, like what I just mentioned in the video? Or do you have some other idea as to how he can maybe show up? Let me know in the comments what you think on this. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up here, and I will see you all on the next one. See you then.